Okay. We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to the latest Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record, joined this week by John Ferguson, who's the editor of the Sunday Mail, of course, Douglas Dickie of the Scottish Daily Express. So, no prizes for guessing which issue continues to dominate Scottish politics, the continued fallout of Peter Murrell's fall and disgrace. We're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, just ahead of a Holyrood debate into whether there's going to be an inquiry into various elements of the scandal. Now, it seems certain that this vote is going to fall because the SNP and the Greens are both against it. They have a majority. They're going to vote against it. So on one level, John, the First Minister will be happy that he's going to succeed in killing this inquiry. But do you agree with me that it's probably short-sighted for him to do so?
Yeah, it kind of feels like John Swinney's approach here is to try to keep a lid on it and hope that in a relatively short period of time this scandal is going to go away. And the problem is that it's just not. There's so many different directions that it can branch off into. You've got the possibility of another police inquiry. People are pushing for this investigation into the £600,000 rather than just the fraud. There's the possibility of a Westminster inquiry. There's the questions over the short money, i.e. public money that has gone into the SNP while this fraud's happening. There's cash for seats questions and what else Peter Murrell might have been taking money for, whether he was accepting cash from donors. So there's just so many different directions that this could go off into. The SNP's political enemies know that they've got real fertile ground here, and I think it probably would have been more sensible for John Swinney to realise that there is no way to keep a cap in this. So the better strategy would be to try to control it, to have your own inquiry in Holyrood, and order some sort of independent SNP inquiry, rather than desperately try to suppress any more talk and end up with MPs in the Commons doing their inquiry. I think they're going to absolutely slaughter the SNP if that's the way this ends up going.
Isn't that it? There's an SNP Green majority. They could have controlled the terms of reference. They could have probably ensured that this multi-headed scandal was kept quite tight and produced a report within a few months. But what they've done now is they've blocked it, or they're about to block it, and they're opening the door to a much wider, probably more painful and damaging inquiry by a Labour-dominated committee that, if they decide to proceed with an investigation, will probably show them no mercy.
Yeah, and I mean, the Scottish Affairs Committee obviously said today that they'll wait and see, the result of that vote. But as we know, it's a kind of foregone conclusion.
They'll have to wait about 2 hours.
Yeah,
so.
and the SNP and Greens are forever telling us that Westminster should respect Holyrood and whatnot. Well, on this occasion, Westminster is respecting Holyrood, given its prominence in this, given its due place, and Holyrood isn't going to do what's required. I actually think as well this doesn't reflect well at all on the Greens, who now just appear nothing more than the kind of slightly more left-wing branch of the SNP. Why they're so dead set against it is, well, it's because they don't want to turn on their fellow nationalists, I think. They don't want, deep down, they don't really want to challenge the SNP. Ross Greer likes to present himself as this kind of Machiavellian schemer and this guy taking it to the establishment, and yet when the establishment has needed him to kind of roll over and get in line, he's done just that, and it looks like it's going to get John Swinney, a temporary reprieve. But the whole thing, I've said it before, why wouldn't you want to take control of this narrative? And as ever with the SNP, in some ways it seems to be their attempts to put a lid on this are even worse than what would happen if they just come out in the first place and had a.
The danger is it blows up in your
Yeah,
face.
exactly.
In the end.
Exactly, and it feels like some sort of probe into this is inevitable. So why not have it on your terms in a parliament that you dominate and a committee that you're going to have a majority on? It's utterly baffling.
Quite an
Also
amusing
as well, like the idea that because we've had a police investigation, because we've had branch rob, that's enough. Nothing more to see here. And there's clearly massive issues to do with SNP governance. There's questions about why did the police investigation take so long? What were the actions of the Crown Office? Has public money been stolen as well? I mean, it's not simply about Peter Murrell's embezzlement. There are much wider issues that an inquiry could look into. And it just seems to me that John Swinney's desperate not to lift up the boot on this scandal, because I think he's scared what might then be revealed.
I think that's just, I suspect that even he doesn't know what might come out of a deeper parliamentary investigation. I mean, if you look at the SNP has been the party of government in Scotland for 20 years. At the end of this parliamentary term, it will be going on for a quarter of a century. The party has been run by an out-and-out fraudster. There's all sorts of ways potentially that Peter Murrell could have, even, and this isn't even to say that anyone else was criminally responsible, but there's all sorts of ways that he could put pressure on the political side of things, allow his role as a chief executive to bleed into politics and bleed into the governing of the nation. So these things just are worthy of further scrutiny, you know. And up to now, the narrative of the SNP are very keen to push as, well, we are the victims. But it just doesn't really wash, does it? The SNP may be, or other members of the SNP may be some of the victims, but actually the whole of the public are victims if public money's gone into the SNP.
Also non-SNP pro-independence donors as well.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately all of Scotland, given that they've been governed by this party, which clearly at the heart of it there was you know, some really quite serious criminality going on. So I think it's obviously going to go further. Interesting subplot. I think it's Patricia Ferguson, the Labour MP, who's the chairs the Scottish Affairs Committee at Westminster. Nicola Sturgeon called her hapless in her book, frankly. So that could be one that comes back to haunt her. Yeah, I mean, it's going to run and run, isn't it?
Now, let's imagine there is a Westminster inquiry. I had a story last week that some folk in the SNP are considering a position of boycotting it. That is, if it comes in that they want someone to appear and they'll just say no. So I had a look, and basically you can invite a witness to attend a Westminster committee. They don't do that, then a summons can be issued. Then there can be a person found in contempt of the Parliament, and then sanctions. Now, John Swinney, Nicola Sturgeon may want to face that down, but that would just dominate the news agenda for months if that happens, and it will just look like they are desperate to avoid any scrutiny of something that is of huge interest to the public.
Yeah, and we were actually talking about this earlier on the Express desk. I mean, imagine the optics of a Westminster inquiry, you know, having to compel the First Minister of Scotland to give evidence, and him refusing and potentially being found in contempt. It's actually a remarkable thought. And, you know, Nicola Sturgeon, despite when she was only going to make one statement on it, has seemed quite keen to kind of tell her side of the story. So if she's not willing to tell her side of the story when it's not on her terms, again, people are going to start asking questions again. John Swinney, everything looks like it. I'm not saying there is, but it looks like cover up. You know, it looks like the SNP are trying to cover it up, and whether they are or not, you know, doesn't matter. The optics of it are such that it's just such a terrible look for them, and for a party that has especially down south have this quite cuddly image, I think, at times. I think the London press have went really easy on the SNP over the years. They're finally having their eyes open to them. That this is a party mired in secrecy. Their record for openness in government isn't great. I think we've all had FOIs from them that are more redaction than the actual text, and this just kind of adds to that reputation they've got. And
also, as well, you see that IndyRev 2, they want a second independence referendum. They want to negotiate with the UK
Westminster.
government and the Westminster parties, and yet they may treat the UK Parliament with such disdain that they won't even cooperate with an inquiry. If John Swinney was smart, he'd be trying to make an inch of progress on IndyRev 2 by being more diplomatic with the UK government. But this is just going to harden relations between the Scottish government and the UK government. And so I think their overall objective is going to be as far away as ever.
Yeah, it feels like he's playing a bad hand here. I think that a clever position would be to accept there is going to be some kind of inquiry. And number two, I think that he is in very dangerous ground in that he seems determined not to break ranks with Nicola Sturgeon on this.
That's what it comes down to for me.
Yeah, I think that's at the root of it, and I just don't know if that's really a position that can be maintained. There is no, even if we accept Nicola Sturgeon's timeline on what she knew and when she knew it, there has clearly been a catastrophic and unacceptable failure of judgment at the beginning of this, when she refused to accept that you couldn't have a husband and wife running as chief executive and party leader. And there was then another catastrophic error of judgment at the end where she shut down anyone that asked questions. I just don't think it's a maintainable position for John Swinney not to. I mean, in fact, John Swinney has apologised for this scandal, but Nicola Sturgeon is refusing to. And I think in that context, I don't think it's really a maintainable position for John Swinney to continue giving Nicola Sturgeon his backing and to try to protect her from further scrutiny or criticism in this.
As you say, even if you accept that Nicola Sturgeon didn't know anything about her husband's thieving, the financial controls in place when she was SNP leader were shocking. I mean, he was allowed to sign off his own expenses. I mean, you could not do that in the private sector. If you have a husband and wife team running a political party, the financial controls must be beyond reproach. But they were the opposite. They were slack. They allowed this fraudster to nip in and nick 400 grand of SNP money. So,
I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's biggest problem for me is that even if she's telling the truth, and with no reason to doubt her, the truth from her point of view doesn't look great for her either. She's a bit like, I didn't know that this was happening. Well, maybe you should.
Yeah.
But
she was the SNP leader. She has to make sure that are sound.
And people raised it. It's not as if people weren't warning her about it, but she just completely dismissed it because, of course, the party name, the good name of the party, comes above all else. I also think, John alluded to it, the actions of the Crown Office, I think, need to be looked at as well. When you think of the timings of this, and I don't want to go down a kind of tinfoil hat route here, but the Operation Branchform was launched just after the 2021 election, and then the whole saga happens to come to an end 3 weeks after the next election. And I know the Sun gave them the opportunity to push it on, but there's that relationship now between the Lord Advocate and the Scottish Cabinet that really needs to be, because again, regardless of the innocence of it, the optics of it are dreadful. You've this person sitting in Cabinet who's, head of the Crown Prosecution Service, and it just seems that the timing of everything that's went on has been in the SNP's favour electorally. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything dodgy going on, but again, the people see that, and we need to get answers to it. The public deserve to know how these decisions came about.
We had a story this morning, Professor James Mitchell, veteran SNP watcher. He said that if Murrell's guilty plea had been entered in April, i.e. ahead of the election rather than a few days after the election, it would have had a major impact on the result, and that the SNP Green pro-Indy majority would have been at risk. You buying it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen before the election, I think it was more in Common done some research that the negative story with the biggest cut through about the SNP was Operation Branchform. But of course, no one could really discuss it because the Murrell stuff get pushed down, and don't want to get, but you know, the role of certain newspapers and other media outlets in this, I don't think gets enough airtime. But I'll maybe move on from that. But the fact of the matter is, they could have had it in April. They could have pushed it to April, but they pushed it to May, till after the election. The opportunity was there, and they've done it. And it might be, you know, that's just the process. But we deserve, you know, the public deserves to know that, because there's no doubt at all that that decision to push Murrell's court hearing until after the election had an impact on the results of the Scottish election. And we might be looking at a very different Scottish Parliament. I think if there was an election tomorrow, we'd be looking at a very different Scottish Parliament.
What impact do you think it had?
I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Would the SNP have still won the election,
I think they would
even
still
if
have
all
won.
this stuff
I
had
think
come
they
out
would still
Definitely the
have won.
largest
a few
party.
weeks before the?
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about the state of devolution. I mean, I think, to be fair to Crown Office, I think they were really damned if they did and damned if they didn't with this, in the sense that it had been a 5-year investigation. If it had come to a head a couple of weeks before the election, they would be probably facing even more vehement accusations of this being a political stitch-up to try to harm the SNP. I think, given the amount of time that had passed, it was, you know, to have done it before would have looked pretty bad. I do tend to think that people, you know, Crown Office is I don't think it's a corrupt organisation.
No,
I don't
I'm
think
not
the Lord
a
Advocate
conspiracy
is,
theorist on this.
you know, a corrupt person. She's like, any lawyer you talk to will say that she's been a very good Lord Advocate, in fact, and has, you know, there's the idea of questioning her integrity is just not really fair. I do think that if you look right back to the beginning, though, there is, like, this investigation took 5 years. People tend to forget that the timeline on it was that Police Scotland sort of started Operation Branchform 2021. Pretty much nothing happened for 3 years until the National Crime Agency in London got involved. There's all still this sort of question mark over exactly what was going on behind the scenes there when Police Scotland apparently asked them to review their investigation, and it was clearly after that that suddenly everything really got stepped up. So yeah, I mean, these are the kind of things that people deserve to know what was going on, and that is exactly these sorts of questions that some sort of parliamentary inquiry would get to the bottom of.
So I'm just looking at the potential issues that are still to be resolved in this. So Peter Murrell sentencing, which is later this month. This potential parliamentary inquiry could get a civil action against the SNP from people who've lost it financially, a proceeds of crime action, and also a possible second police probe into the Indy Rev 2 donations. So this could drag on for years.
Oh yeah, years. I don't think you could put onto that list the possibility of a judicial review, which these things are expensive, but there's so much public outrage out there over this that, you know, you've got this crowdfunding avenue. So yeah, I mean, the SNP could end up embroiled in this thing for another decade.
I thought the salmon sturgeon fallout was the biggest story of devolution, but I think this is definitely.
I mean,
this
they're all
needs to-
linked.
They're all interlinked in some ways, aren't they?
You know, like, I mean, a fascinating question. Do you think if the Scottish government hadn't taken the decision in 2016, to go after Salmond over the sexual harassment allegations, if that decision had never happened, would any of this happen? I suspect not.
Yeah.
You mean that Murrell would have got away with it?
Yeah, I don't think anyone would ever have known anything about it.
Or they might have been more inclined to look the other way. You know, I think the Alex Salmon things created
I suspect nobody would have been asking questions about the finances, looking at where money from ring-fenced funds had gone to, sort of pushing everything on. I think that Alex Salmon probably had a lot to do with all of that behind the scenes.
Salmon's folk point out as well that for him, Murrell was a thief even back in the 1990s when he worked for Salmon, took petty cash, or I don't know what the exact circumstances were, but it was a few £100 that went missing.
I don't understand why they kind of come out with that line. I don't think it makes Alex Salmon look good. It makes him look, why did he then let Murrell stay? We know that he got the job under John Swinney, and then Alex Salmon comes back in 2004. Alex Salmon knows he's a thief, but says, I'm going to keep him on as chief executive when he can get his fingers in the pot. I don't think that's quite the gotcha for the Salmon camp that they think it is. I think it actually makes him look weak and him look, it makes him look complicit in some ways. Why didn't he raise these concerns? Why didn't he boot Murrell out?
It's a strange one, isn't it? I think the idea is that he was involved in some sort of petty theft. Alex Salmon just felt sorry for him and kind of given him a slap in the wrist and let him keep his job, but ultimately had in the back of his mind that he was not of the highest levels of personal integrity.
And then kept him on as chief executive for 10 years. Just...
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
We'll just move on from branch form in Murrell for a second. I think this morning we had some protests across Scotland following the Belfast knife attack. There were hundreds of demonstrators, many of whom had their faces covered. I guess, John, the point to make here is that protest is fine, but thuggery, racism and violence are never fine.
Yeah, I mean, the incident in Northern Ireland is horrific. It's perfectly legitimate to ask questions about immigration, etc. But it's just really sad and unacceptable if you have people in Glasgow, trying to deliver takeaways on bikes, suddenly being abused and attacked in the street because of the colour of their skin. That's an extremely sad place for us to find ourselves, and you just really hope that the new intake of reform MSPs at Parliament can see that stoking this stuff is a really bad path to go down.
I mean, what is it they're protesting about, other than the horrific incident in Northern Ireland?
I mean, it was all very unsavoury, and I think you make the point. Protest is fine, but I don't really see why battering some random in the street is sticking it to the deep state, as these people seem to kind of think it is. One other point I would make on it is, we speak about protests. There were protests in Edinburgh, Falkirk, Perth and Ayr as well, I think. And John Swinney lumped them in with what happened in Glasgow, which I think is a kind of dangerous route to go down, because whether you agree with those protests or not, people have a right to protest, and I think people who were maybe there, and you can have your opinions on what type of people might have went to it and who was there, and you can have your opinions on what they were or weren't protesting about, but they have a right to gather. And I think it was a mistake for John Swinney to lump them in with what happened in Glasgow.
Oh, it's suspicious people who are protesting with their faces covered.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't, if you believe in something that strongly, then you should,
it's like you're doing something wrong.
Willing enough to. But I mean, if you're going with your face covered and you're intent in breaking the law, but people in Edinburgh, etc., weren't breaking the law. People in Glasgow were. I think if you believe in something that much, have the strength of character to show your face. But I think as well, quite a lot of it is just young boys spoiling for a fight, and it doesn't really matter what the fight's about. They just want to fight, and I don't think you can actually play down how big a part that will play in things like this. Just young boys, frustrated young boys, angry young men, just want to lash out at anything.
I mean, I think that is always there, but the danger then is when you've got Nigel Farage calling for rage over incidents that, to be honest, I'm not really convinced that there was any sort of like, racial element to the incident in the UK, sorry, in England, where some white guy's been handcuffed after being stabbed. I think that was a very tragic mistake. I don't really, I'm not quite buying the idea that he
I
was
think the issue
handcuffed
there is more the push
because
response.
he was
than-
white. The police have
yeah.
made a mistake, but to call for rage over immigration policy on the back of that, I think, is really irresponsible.
All right, let's move on to a happier subject, the World Cup. So the men's team will be taking part in the World Cup later this week. I think the first time in 1998.
28 years.
First Minister John Swinney is going to be there, as will his Sports Minister Marie Todd. Both of them, I think, are there on official business. Two other members of the government, Stephen Flynn and Alison Thewlis, are also going to be in America. I think they've been given a pass, or they've been slipped by the First Minister, effectively given permission. There's been some criticism of the fact that this quartet are in the World Cup when the Parliament is still sitting. Do you sympathise with the criticism?
I mean, it kind of feels a little bit like killjoyish, doesn't it, to start moaning about they shouldn't be at the World Cup, who should and shouldn't be there. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced that 4 members of the Scottish Government need to be there on sort of official business. To be honest, I'm quite surprised that there hasn't been criticism of politicians going to the World Cup at all, given some of the things that America have been doing in the international stage over the last couple of years.
Past few days,
yeah. So, like, I mean, but yeah, I don't know. I kind of think the primary thing we should all be doing at the moment is getting behind Scotland beating Haiti in a couple of days' time, rather than complaining about what politicians are and aren't there.
Doug, I know you've got strong views on this.
Well, I don't have any issue with Swinney or even Marie Todd being there. I don't even have an issue if Stephen Flynn or Alison Thewlis nipped over for a game. But I think 3 weeks is excessive at a time, when the new government should be trying to hit the ground running. Stephen Flynn especially is a cabinet secretary, and he must have known that he was getting lined up for a cabinet secretary job weeks ago, months ago, when he bullied his way onto the constituency ballot for the election. And of course, as ever with the SNP, the hypocrisy is astounding, because we know that John Swinney himself in Parliament said two Tory MSPs who went to Seville for about 2 days, incidentally, to watch Rangers in the Europa League final, were skiving off work. Yet he's got 2 government ministers buggering off for 3 weeks. I mean, they won't be back at Holyrood until September. Like, this is... And when you're a public servant, I do sympathise in some ways, because especially, I don't really know much about Alison Thewlis' support for the Scottish national team, but I know for a fact that Stephen Flynn is a big Scotland fan and has travelled all over Europe to watch Scotland. But I think when you kind of devote yourself to public service, you need to make sacrifices. And he's been given a really important brief. I know a lot of A9 campaigners were really keen to kind of try and move this dueling project on quickly, and now all of a sudden the guy who I mean, imagine they had a summit, an A9 safety summit in the next few weeks.
Imagine he missed it,
and the transport secretaries in Miami living it up.
There's no way he was going to miss this World Cup, was there?
No, of course.
I take your point about the hypocrisy. I think,
not.
To criticise others, and then, but like, of course, Scotland's First Minister should be at the World Cup. As Sports Minister, probably. The other 2, I mean, I think we can cope with it and being in Scotland for a couple of weeks. I don't think that Scotland's going to go backwards.
No, but it's the opposite.
As a junket.
Of course it is. Politicians and junkets, not me over with a feather.
I think as well, if this was next year, if the World Cup was next year, and they'd been in the role for a year or whatnot, I think there'd be less. But they're only just getting to grips with their portfolios, and yet they're like, oh, you know what, I'm off. And I just think it's really hypocritical, and I don't think it's a great look.
In the unlikely event I was a minister, I'd be off ski as well. I would definitely be over there.
Well, didn't you cancel a holiday to cover the general election in 2024?
Oh no, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, I was a model of professionalism.
But that's a man, committed to his craft.
Yeah, no, that's true. Shame on you, Stephen Flynn. No, I don't begrudge him at all. I think
And there is
it's
a
fine.
double benefit to going to America for a month. If you're a Scottish Government minister, you can sort of escape questions about Peter Murrell.
Peter Murrell. I mean, that's assuming that they get into America, because I'm quite sure both of them have got some rather nasty things about Donald Trump on their social media accounts. He'll be trawling through them.
I wonder if any of the quartet will have problems with their Esther.
Yeah.
That would be a good
Imagine
story
that.
if Stephen Flynn ends up getting turned back at the border.
I'm sure John Swaney can just phone his good pal Donald Trump and get him.
US immigration officials just scroll down Stephen Flynn's Twitter feed. No, you're not coming in, mate.
Yeah. On the first flight back home, back to an A9 summit.
All right, I think that wraps it up. Thanks very much to Doug and to John for joining me. Thanks also to Angus from the Records video team who produced this episode. You can listen to Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or watch it on the Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.